On page 16, Tzurba MiRabanan he has a general introduction to Kashrus laws, and he asks who's believed, who's trustworthy, upon whom can we rely on for Kashrus. You're going to a restaurant, to a hotel, you've been invited to someone's home, or you have various items, food stuff that you bought and you brought home. What are the rules that govern reliability on kashrus? And we start with the principle called Eid Echad Nem Bisurin. And the Torah relies on the testimony of one witness. We'll see exactly how we know that. Well, let's say you have a piece of meat and you're not sure, you have a suffix if it's chelev or if it's shuman, and the two of them look almost identical. This is called lo ischazik isura, meaning we don't know, and we never knew that this piece of meat was ever asur. It could be it was never prohibited, it was always shuman. And what's the source for the fact that one witness is trusted to tell me whether this is kosher and it's shuman, or whether it's asur because it's chelev? One witness, says Rashi, Hamina Torah, the Torah trusts kol echad v'echad b'Yisrael al afroshes truma v'al hashchita v'al nikur hagid v'hachelev. Rashi has three cases in which the Torah, excuse me for a minute, I'm just going to try to see if I can
Bobby, mute, Bobby.
Sorry.
Okay. All right then. So we'll go through these three cases of Rashi where Rashi claims the Torah trusts one witness. Now notice that in all these cases, pretty much, maybe the last case could be different, but the first two for sure, you have what's called a chezkas isur, because once you cut down and harvest your grains, you already have tevel. So we want to know whether or not truma, maser, etc., was taken away and therefore was matir the tevel. Or in the case of shchita, you've got Avram and Achai, and you have to know that there was a shchita that was done. You also have the problem of the vela, and you want to trust the Eid Echad. Rashi says the Torah trusts one witness. And Rashi adds, the lav hachi, if the Torah didn't trust one witness, then ein lecha adam ochel mishal chavero, ve'ein lecha adam somech al b'nei beiso. I come home, I want to eat something. Who's going to testify that this is kosher? Or I was invited to my friend's house. How would I know whether I could eat there? It's impossible to tell me that the only way that I can rely on something being kosher is that two witnesses came and testified to that effect. That's impossible. The Tosas quoting Rashi at the beginning of Masechta Gittin says, "Lo haylo lahaskir." There are two cases that he should not have mentioned, and those are Afroshes Truma and Shechita. Why? Because those cases are cases of Ischazik Isura. And then you'll ask me, so then how do I trust a witness in those two cases? Eid Echad is not believed against the Chezkas Isur, which we saw at the beginning of Masechta Gittin. That was our first stop on the road here. That you don't know if it's Shuman or if it's Chelev. It was never definitely Asur, but in the cases of Tevel and a Behema, it was definitely Asur. So really, Tosas says, we wonder in amazement why an Eid Echad would be believed to testify in Shechita or in Hafrashas Trumas and Maasros. And Tosas answers that comes under a whole different category. That's not Eid Echad Nem Bisurin, but rather that's called Biyado. Biyado means we trust the person to testify that he did what he is capable of doing. If he has the ability to be mafresh or to shecht, then we trust him. Why? That's called biyado. So we have to keep in mind that Tosfos now separates two different categories of credibility in kashrus. One is called eid echodem bisurin, and the other one is called biyado. And the difference is that whereas eid echodem bisurin does not operate and is not reliable in a case of ischazik isura, where we had a cheskes isur, we knew at one point in time this was definitely also cannot trust one aid. The principle of biyado, however, operates even when it's against the cheskes isur, meaning when a person is telling me that that which was asur now is mutter because a afrasha was implemented, a shchita was implemented, and he's trustworthy because of biyado. That's not what we're looking for. Rashi's looking for a source, not for the nemonis of biyado, but rather the nemonis of eid echad. And 2 out of the 3 cases he quotes, Rashi, are cases of biyado. Now, in a case of Shuman versus Chalev, there it's not biyado. He can't determine that it's Shuman and not Chalev. You know, he can't make Shuman and Chalev into Shuman, but he's believed because there's no cheskes isur. So that could have been a good example. But Tosfos says I have a better example. If I'm looking for the original source from which we derive the principle of eid echodem bisurin, I'm going to find it in the parsha of Nida. So a man comes home to his wife, and she says, I'm tahora. She's believed as eid echodem bisurin. And in fact, the Gemara Masechta Ksubis, on Daf Ayin Beis, don't forget Ayin Beis, Azariah Berzon. And there the Gemara says that a woman is believed as far as Nida is concerned because of the pasuk, V'safra la. Now, she herself counts the Zayin Nikiyim, and she's believed to say that she's tahora. 7 clean days have passed. The Tosfos says that's a valid biblical source for the nemonis of eid echad. Yeah, but Tosfos is in trouble now because clearly the conclusion to be derived from the Safra law is that eid echad nem bisurin against a cheskes isur because a nida is a cheskes isur. So, for example, we know that she was a nida yesterday. Now she says she's no longer nida. She is contradicting a moment in which we knew for absolute certainty that she was asura. So should we come to the conclusion based on the Safra law that an eid echad is believed against the cheskes isur? The Gemara says in Gittin that's not so. Eid echad is only believed when there's no cheskes isur. The Tomer asks Tosfos, is the bottom of page 16. Afilu is chazik isura, yeshlom de'ena b'chezka sheteroa kol shah. When a certain period of time passes since her nidus, then her chazaka changes automatically, because the assumption is that the body stops producing the dam. It's not going to be shofas dam, all the time, continuously. So Tosfos says that the case of Nida is not to be classified as iskazik isura. But Tosfos makes the following stipulation. There's got to be at least a reasonable amount of time, let's call it 7 days, that have passed, in which, as a result of the 7-day period, she now changes her chazaka, and her cheskes isur falls apart. Tosfos is still not out in the clear, because even if the 7 days have passed, she doesn't automatically become tahora. She still has a state of tumah until she's toveles. Says Tosfos, biyada litval. So here in the case of nida, follow what's going on here. It's really sharp. We have now an overlap of two different categories of nemonis. One category is Eid Echad Nem Bisurim, but that's not enough, because Eid Echad Nem Bisurim will only tell me that the time has passed and now she could potentially be mitayar herself through tefillah, but she's still in a state of Isur. So why is she believed now against the Cheskas Isur? So you're telling me that when she says that there was Zayin Nikiyim, well, there's no chazak against that because we know a week has passed by. But she does contradict the Cheskas Isur when she says Tavalti. And until we believe that she went to the mikvah, then she's still in Nida and the Isur is still there. The Tosafos says now we have a different category of Nemonis. Now she's believed not midin Eid Echad Nem Bisurin, but midin biyado. And biyado by far surpasses the scope of and the power of the credibility of Eid Echad Nem Bisurin. As we said before, biyado works even against the Cheskas Isur. And that's why Tosafos says in the case of Shechita, or in the case of Afrashas Truma, we believe in Eid Echad, not midin Eid Echad Nem Bisurin, but midin biyado. Yeah, Joe?
Are you able to, the case with Nida is so much different than the other cases, I would think, because it's an ongoing state. You have every month he's going to have to go through this. Every month this trusting process is in place. So, and it's something that he could find out. It's a lot different than another situation in which it's really a one-time situation. Would you say that, or?
Well, again, right now she's in Nida. We know that. How do we know that she's no longer in Nida? Meaning,
I understand, but my question is with regards to bringing something that we do with Nidas, with being a Nida, and taking it forward to other instances. It's like it's ongoing that we continuously have this question with her. So maybe the halacha for a woman with her husband, paspasalo, there's all kinds of things that are involved there, which we wouldn't necessarily have the same question with the, tuma tahara or regular cases or kashrut. I'm just asking.
I'm thinking there's almost a kal v'chomer here. The Isur Nida is an Isur Kares. If you eat unkosher meat, that's only an Isur Lav. I mean, it's not... And if the Torah believes her through V'safra law, and the Torah doesn't require any evidence, any testimony other than her own testimony about herself, and the Torah relies on her, because otherwise... So what's V'safra law? So therefore, I can make a kal v'chomer, how much more so if I have something that is asur, but it's not a chiyuv kares, an Eid Echad should be believed. Tosafos has a problem, because in the case of Nida, she's believed to change and to undermine a Cheskas Isur. Tosafos says, well, after a certain period of time passes by, she no longer has the Cheskas Isur. Because the Cheskas Isur is generated by the biological situation of Dam, which is a situation that will terminate. And therefore, the Cheskas Isur is going to terminate. We assume now that she went into a state of Tara. Tosafos says we have a problem. She's not in a state of Tara. She needs tefillah. And she's believed to say Tovelas. So once again, should we say that Eid Echad Nem Bisurin against the Cheskas Isur? And Tosafos answers biyado. So as far as establishing that there was Zayin Nikiyim, she's believed, and that in itself is not against the any chazak. There's no chazak that contradicts her when she claims Zayin Nikiyim. 7 clean days have passed by. We can't contradict her, because we know that's exactly what's meant to happen. We can predict that she'll have days of nidus, of yitzias dam and amokar, and then she'll have days of Nikius. She's not contradicted by any chazaka. That's the breakthrough of Tosfos. Okay, fine. So now she's believed to say that she had Zayin Nikiyim, and the potential is therefore being matter these Nida. But the clincher and the absolute critical requirement is going to be Tvila. How could you believe her on the Tvila when she's changing her status from Heter, from Isa to Heter? Tos says that would not be Eid Echad Bisur. That would not come under the purview and the credibility of an Eid Echad. Because you're changing her status from Isa to Heter. We can't rely on one aid for that. But we have a new category, which is called Biyado. And in the case of Tvila, when we're trying to figure out, did she undergo that a Tvila that would change her status from Isa to Heter? Well, it's Biyado. Just like we believe a person who could shecht a piece of meat to say it was shechted, we believe a person who could be mafresh trumas and meisers to say that in fact he was mafresh trumas and meisers. So too, we believe a nida to say that she went to the mikveh. That's called biyad. And the power, again, I'm saying it over for the third time because I want it to sink in. The power of biyado is that it overcomes a chezkas isur. And that's the essence of biyado. Biyado means it had a chezkas isur, but he has the ability to change that chezkas isur. And if it's in his hands, literally biyado, to change and remove the chezkas isur, he's believed to say he did so. And that's what we're going to derive from this Safra law. So in essence, and you'll see this on page 17 in the name of the Maharsha, and we'll see it more clearly in the name of the Rashba, there are two different chidushim, two different halachic principles that according to Tosfos we derive from the Safra law. One principle is that she's believed when there's no chazaka that contradicts her, and that's going to be Eid Echad and then Bisur, like in the case of Safek Shuma and Safek Chelev. And then we're going to derive another chiddush called Biyado, that even when she is testifying to change her status from Isur to Heter, she's believed if it's Biyado. So she's telling us two different things. She's testifying on Zayin Nikiyim. That means her nidus terminated, and now she's in a state of non-nidus. And here she's believed me dinei echad and bisur. There's no chazaka to contradict her. And the Torah is telling me that we believe her not only on Zayin Nikiyim, but also on Tvila, and that comes against the chezkas isa that contradicts her, and it's based on biyado. I hope you followed that. I mean, if you take a look in the Rashba, you'll see it clearly. The Rashba says, the Imtomar Minola, and how do we know that Eid Echad is believed? Nafkala mi v'safra la v'darshinon. This is Gemara Ksubis, and you didn't forget the page, Ayin Beis, right? V'darshinon la liatzma. Okay, the Imtomar Imkein Afilus Chazik Yisura. Yeshlomar Kevan Didamya Poskim Mimela. As a natural course of events, she will stop flowing down. Therefore, Yemei Asfir Boy Malea. And therefore, there's no chazaka against her. Where do we have the case where there's no chazaka against you? Safek Chelev, Safek Shuman. Now we have a problem. The Imishum Tvila. We need to believe her that she actually underwent a change in status that was triggered off by Tvila. And there we certainly have a chazaka that she did not have a Tvila, that she's in a state of nidus. That's definite. How could she be believed? Says the Rashba, Mishum Tvila, if we have to believe her that she was Toveles, Havi Le Kishchita de Biyada L'Taka. So we have here the Nemonis of Biyad. Now the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredei Kuf Chav Zayin formulates a very interesting chiddush here. He says, Eid Echad nem bisur lahatir avolo lahachmir. the Torah in V'Safra law, and for the same token, according to Rashi, in Afrashas Truma, or in Nikra Gid, or in the case of Shchita, in all these cases, the Torah is telling me that the aid is believed lahatir. Lahatir nida, lahatir nevela, lahatir tevel. The Torah never established that we rely on eid echad leisur. So we're going to see that that's a very controversial position of the Mechaber. And the Ramah immediately comments that, wait a second, you know what? I'll tell you when we need an Eid Echad lahachmir. Let's imagine situations in which I have reason to believe that this is not kosher. I can't eat it unless I know for sure it's kosher. How do I know it's kosher? I have to check. That's called bedika. And the paradigmic case of bedika, where the Torah requires bedika, is called toloim. Torah says you can't just eat something that might be bug infested unless you check it out. So right now, even before the witness comes in to testify l'chumra, which the Mechaber says we don't trust him, I have to be machmir on my own because I didn't do an adequate bedika. So let's say, for example, and we're going now on a deraisa level, I want to buy wine from a guy. I can't just buy wine from a guy. How do I know that it's not yayin nesen? I'm not talking now about stam yeno. I'm talking about the real bona fide deraisa of avodah zarah. So I have to do a bedika. I can't just buy wine from a guy and assume that it's kosher wine. Now an Eid Echad comes in, and guess what he tells me? I know that this wine that you bought from a guy is yayin esech. Says Ramah, we have to trust the Eid. Why? Because in any event, I needed a bedika. So whenever you have a suffix, and you don't know whether something is asur or mutter, then one of two things is going to have to happen. Either you're going to have to check it out and find an Eid Echad who testifies that it's mutter. Like, for example, I don't know if this is chelev or shuman. I can't eat it because suffix d'oraisa l'chumra. And then I need an Eid Echad to testify that he knows that this is shuman and not chelev. Alternatively, I invite the Eid Echad, and he tells me, you know what? This is chelev. Says the Ramah, we're going to believe him. Why? Because he's not taking something that's mutter and making it asur. It was asur even before he testified that he knew it was asur because of suffix. And now it's an amazing halacha, because after the Eid Echad testifies that this is chelev and not shuman, if somebody goes ahead and eats it in front of two witnesses and he gets a warning asra, he'll be chayv malchus now. It's no longer a suffix. It now became a vadai cheftzeh di surah. It is chelev. And why is it chelev? Because in this case, we rely on Eid Echad and we establish that this is chelev with all the repercussions down the line. So the Ramah said,
another case also like that.
I can't hear you.
There's another case also, like learned of Yoni that long ago. You have two Eidah for Kina and Stira, and then an Eidah comes along and says she was the nace.
Right, I was thinking of that case, David. But the only thing is that in that case, she was Asura even before the Eid Echad. Because once there was Stira, then until she drinks for the Meimarim, he's not allowed to have a relationship with her.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And the Torah actually made that into a vadai. But
right.
In any event, the Ramah writes on the bottom of 17, Yesh omrim de bedavar de ikal evrure, something that I can't rely on without a clear birur. Kigon she'amar lo echad bo v'arecha oved kochav menasech yencha. I saw that on this yayin, that guy, that idol worshiper, used it for his avodah zarah. It's tzarich lachish l'dvara. Now I don't know. The language of the Ramoy is a little bit weak. He says tzarich lachish l'dvara. I don't know what he means by that, because the Rambam in Hilchos Machalos Asuras says that ha'isur al pi echad yuchzak, and it's a chazaka now that it's awesome. But he says kol davar shelo is chazik lo lahetev lo isur echad neman, and when he's believed to tell me it's shuman, he's equally likely and likewise believed to say that it's chayla. Kol hechad is chazik davar bi isur kon tevel lo chatichas posa sheina menukeres ein ha'ed neman olav latiro. The Ramah says he's not believed against the Cheskas Isur. The Ramah is simply quoting the Gemara at the beginning of Gittin. Ellen came biyado. Now we have a whole new category of Nemanis, which is called biyado. The Adam Neman al Shalo afilu hechad is chazik Isur. If I know that it's mutter, then I'm allowed to eat it. You don't know it's mutter, and you go back to the chazaka of Isur, you're not allowed to eat it, unless I testify on your behalf. But I'm allowed to eat it because I know that it's heter. And since David mentioned sota, I'll put in my own 2 cents. There's a tremendous plukta about whether or not this halach that we're learning now, that I know it's mutter, applies in the case of sota. So let's say, for example, we have something called echad leboel, and the boel with whom she had stira, he knows that they never, you know what. So is he allowed to eat? Is he allowed to have a relationship with her after her husband gives her a get or dies? And now we're on page 18. The Piskei Tshuva writes, Eid echadem bisurin ein tzarich lakar. We don't need chakir. Now, this Piskei Tshuva, in my mind, is a davar pashut, but I think it's very fundamental. With regard to edus, we don't rely on edim without what's called drisha v'chakira. We have to interrogate the edim. And the sugyas in Sanhedrin about how and what questions we will have to drill the edim, put them over the hot coals. But Eid Echad doesn't require chakira. We do not have to investigate him. We don't have to ask, when did you see this, and how did you see it, and where were you? And you said none of that. And the yesod, the fundamental principle here, is that when we rely on one witness and his testimony in Kashrus, that's not edus. That's nemanus. And there's a fundamental difference between the two. Edus is a technical legal category that has its own power, its own authority, and its own requirements, its own preconditions. Nemanus is something totally different. Nemanus means that a person has a certain level of credibility. They would not be kosher for edus. For example, a woman who testifies on herself that she's no longer nida, in Hilchas Edus, she's not kosher for Edus. And for that matter, if a person is neman for himself, in Edus, ein oda meid al atzma. So we have many, many cases and many, many categories of cases where we believe the Eid Echad without Edus. There's no category of Edus here. And the psulim, the technical disqualifications for Edus, do not apply to Eid Echad and Bisurim. We're going to have a whole discussion about a katan. Can we trust a katan in Kashrus? Well, in Edus, we don't trust a katan. So, and not only that, we're going to have discussions here about a guy. Can you trust a guy in Kashrus? Again, I'm not sure if that's nemanus. That might be a whole different category unto its own. But whatever it is, we're out of the category of Edus, and therefore, we don't need chakira. So I don't have to ask the aide, well, were you there when they cracked the egg, to make sure there was no blood in the egg? Were you there when, in what place and what time, and you saw the afrasha, you saw the shchita, whatever you saw? Okay. Now comes the main topic for today. And it's especially true in contemporary society. Can we trust someone in Kashrus and he swears on the Bible that this is kosher, but this person does not observe the laws of Kashrus? Forget about Shabbos for a minute. That's a different story. But we're talking about a person who's not careful about Kashrus. And he testifies that it's kosher. And the Rambam actually formulates this in terms of a guest who's eating in the house of his host. And huchzak she'eno kosher. V'eno v'dagdek v'elu ha'isur. We have a host who invited you to his table, but he's not observant and meticulous about the laws of Kashrus. My father was a rav at his shul, and very, very often he tried to make a chok v'lo that none of the balabatim would invite him. He would say no to everyone. But there were occasions where he had to go. And Rabbi, we're going to have disposable dishes, and we're going to order from Sat B'Shchita, and the whole 9 yards. Question is, can you rely on them? So the Rambam writes, Osur l'sarech etzla. You should not take him up on the offer. This is the Rambam who's a scholar, who's in a community that's, very open in Cairo and then later on in Spain, and so forth and so on. But the Rambam says, don't accept such an offer. He did the wrong thing, and he went to eat there. He should not eat meat. He should not drink wine. Anything that has a serious issue of kashrus, which is beinenu today, it's almost everything. Give me a drink of water. That's about it. Today in Israel, I suppose you have it in Canada too, we have what's called Maya B'Tam. Even Maya B'Tam needs a hechsher because there's a problem with Trumas and Maisros. So I don't even know if I could drink water in his house. We used to have a phrase when we were growing up. I would drink water in his house, meaning that's all I would do. The only thing I would drink is a glass of lavasa. And it has to be cold water too. So Shulchan Aruch says that if he's choshed lechol davar isur, bein beisurei Torah, ubein beisurei d'Rabbanan. You're talking about a person who is careless about the Rabbanans. And he lost his nemanis. He's no longer eirech enem bisurit. The Ramah says, "Ein lechol af etzel misha eino mukar b'cheskes kashrus." The Ramah takes it one step further. He says the following: not only in a case where you know that he's not careful about kashrus, but let's say you don't know anything. Maybe he is careful about kashrus, maybe he's not. Don't eat in his house. He's guilty until proven innocent. And the Shulchan Aruch codifies this in Siman Kuf Yutes, HaChoshid lechol dvar masurim, beinemu choshud b'isurei Torah, beinemu choshud b'isurei d'Rabbanan. Here in Israel, where we have the issue of Trumas and Maisros, you go to Canada, you're like on vacation. It's like Gishmak. All of a sudden, a tremendous burden has been lifted from your shoulders. I don't mean Dafka Canada, I mean anywhere in Chutz La'aretz. But here in Eretz Yisrael, you've got a problem with someone who buys in Shuk Machne Yehuda in a place that doesn't have a hechsher, because that's called Dmai. Now, I'm not getting into the whole issue about Tnuva and this and that. Leave that all out. You buy in a shuk from farmers. There's no to this Kashrus. There's no Tnuva, nothing. The guy doesn't know beans. It's Dmai. So a person who buys that Tvua and takes it home and eats it, and he violates the Isur Dmai, he's choshed on Isurei D'Rabbanan. If you told him, hey, this is Tevel Doraisa, he would say, oh, let me call the rabbi, and it'll be mafresh for me, Trumas of Maisus. But the Mechaber does seem to restrict or limit this lack of credibility. He says, Lo yochal mishalo midvarim shu choshed aleihem. As if to say that you might be able to divide it up into parts. He's not makpid on Trumas of Maisus. I can't eat from his fruits and vegetables. He's not makpid on Toloim. I can't eat from anything that might have worms in it. But he only buys his meat that has a hechsher on it. It would seem from the Mechaber that in such a case, you know that the meat is kosher, you're allowed to eat in his house. Says the Ramah, you know what? Yesh omer afilu mimisha eno chashud, chak ein makirin also shu books of a kashrus. Also liknos, you're not allowed to buy from him, you're not allowed to eat from him. But I'm looking for another statement in the Ramah here. Just give me a second. Oh, the Taz quotes a different Ramah. You know, the Ramah wrote Hagos on the Shulchan Aruch. He also wrote a book called Darchei Moshe on the Tur. And the Taz on the bottom quotes the Ramah. Actually, it's on the top of page 19. If we could fast forward for a second. Kosev Darchei Moshe, etc. Misha choshed al Isur, Asur lechol imo. Listen to the next three words. Afilu dvar hamutarim. I know that this is mutter. Can't eat it. Ramon Darchei Moshe says, Sheba yochilenu dvarim hasurim. Now we're reflecting on the chashad, the suspicion of this guy. Later on, we're going to have a situation in Moscow where Moshe Feinstein was asked, what happens to an elderly man? He's alone. He eats in his children's house, grandchildren's house. They don't know beans about kashrus. So you and I would say, well, okay, there's certain things that he knows is kosher. But Moshe says he can't eat by him. And we're going to have to find some sort of a kula here, because the repercussions here are really difficult. Does that mean that if I get invited to anyone whose status is questionable in kashrus, I can't go into the house and eat a thing? Even that which I know is kosher. Because the Taz says in the name of the Ramah that maybe he's going to feed you non-kosher. But let me eat that which I know is kosher. If you're going to refuse him, and it could be members of your immediate family, or it might be a neighbor, a friend, an associate, what are the repercussions down the line? Meaning that there are issues here that go way beyond kashrus. There's something called Ava, if you want to write that down, Aleph Yud Beis Hey. by setting up these barriers between, let's call it the observant and the not yet observant, you are creating ava. There's going to be such resentment. The man refuses to accept my invitation. And certainly if he invites me, I'm not going to go to his house. So is there any room for a kula? So here we have two tshuvas we want to look at. One is Rav Vosner, that's on page 19, number 8, Shevet HaLevi, and the other is Rav Moshe Feinstein, in that case in Moscow. Says the Shevet HaLevi, L'chatchila lo yisareach etzlo klal. If you can get away with it, the best idea is not to be hosted by such a person. We have, for example, very close friends who on Pesach, I'm just giving you their personal minhagim, they won't eat anywhere outside the house. They have even a Yiddish phrase for that, mishtzach. So they set up a standard and we're not insulted because we know that they won't eat outside their house. And if you do it in the best way and you avoid eating in that person's house, you won't even eat dvarim hamutarim, even things that you know are mutar. But then he says, Im avar al zevis hareach etzlo. Now he's in a different situation. He took him up on the invitation. He's now a guest in the house of a host who's not trustworthy in Kashrus. Lo itzrichu levatel harachaso, ela yochal es shavadai mutar. Interesting. We're going to put the Ramah's restriction on the side, overlook it, and we're going to say that b'di'eved, you know what? You're already a guest in his house. You know this is mutar. Go ahead and eat it. We're not going to be afraid that things will get carried away, and he'll tell you to eat this, and he'll tell you to eat that, and before you know it, you're eating dvar masur. But lechatchila, you should avoid it. Because once he's chashad ala isur, asur lechol imo afilu b'dvarim hamutar. But here, we have a tshuva for Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe is faced with a very difficult situation in the Soviet Union of then, and the father, he knows about his daughter or his daughter-in-law, that on the one hand, they themselves eat non-kosher food. They were brought up in communist Russia. And unfortunately, many of them, they don't even believe in God because they were raised in an atheist society. But the father knows for sure that the daughter or daughter-in-law would never ever do anything against the will of their father or father-in-law. And that's called kimle begava. Kimle begava means he knows the nature of this person. Debito v'kaloso lo yachshilu be'isa. They know exactly what the father eats and what he doesn't eat. He's tested her on many occasions. And over again, she passed the test. And she would not try to sneak in something which she knows he would not eat. He's allowed to eat in her house. She can cook for him. Again, he points out that they got to make sure the kalim are kosher, but assuming that there's special kalim, whatever the case might be, you're allowed to eat there. Lachain, on the bottom of the tshuva, b'shas adchak la'noshim chalushim. You have an elderly person. He can't manage on his own. Yesh lahakil im yodea b'birur kimle b'gava mitzad tiv'u seha u'man minagera b'yeza nisyonos Shelo tachshileu lismoch oleha v'lechol mimashim v'shelos ba'ado v'omer she'osa behechsher. Okay, so if you haven't tested her out, then you're not allowed to eat it. Or if you're a healthy person, a regular, normal situation, this kula doesn't apply. But Rav Moshe says that yesh lahakel under these two conditions. Number one, you're dependent, you're desperate. And number two, you know for sure that she's not giving you something that you would not eat. And I emphasize this because we see how serious this whole issue of kashrus is. That the Ramah doesn't want you to eat in someone's house because you might end up eating something that's not kosher. Maybe the case of a rabbi in certain situations, in certain communities, might be a case of shas hadchak. Yeah, sure.
Just would somebody else be allowed to eat that food as well, or does this have
No.
to only?
No, he says explicitly. Do you see that? Aval acherim yesh lahachmin.
Okay, even if it's right in front of them. Yeah, I mean the cherim is meant even on. They can't be trusted with even with the food that she's put out for the father.
Right, correct. That's
Okay.
exactly what he's saying. And the Steichemed writes, which is number 10, he applauds someone who will not eat, as we said before, outside of his house. And he says the following: let's be careful about this chumrah. Let's differentiate between two scenarios. He says the following: if a person says, I don't trust a certain person or a certain body of kashrus or something along that line, then he's treading very thin water. This is really dangerous. He makes like a public announcement almost that the meat coming, let's say from Chutz La'aretz, not kosher. It's treifa. He says that's a problem of evil. You are creating anger and disunity amongst the Jewish people. But a Yachid HaMachmir Al Atzmo, he's not telling anyone not to eat there. He has his own personal chumras. He's not saying that anyone else is eating treifa. He's not making a public announcement that the meat from whatever country it's coming from, let's call it Argentina. He says, oh, don't eat the meat from Argentina. And he's basically implying that anyone who eats from the Argentinian meat is a treif and yak. That's evil. If he himself doesn't want to eat from the Argentinian meat, and by the way, P.S., I think Argentinian meat is very reliable, but if he makes a statement, that's his own personal thing. That's the first half of this tshuva of the Steichem. But now I want to tell you something about the second half of the tshuva. He says the following: let's say you're in a situation where you're invited to eat something, you have doubts whether it's kosher or not, and if you refuse to eat there, and the host understands very well that you are casting dispersion on the food that he's giving you by implying that it's not kosher, and that's going to create ava. Says the Steichemed, you could lie through your teeth. And there's no Isur midvar sheker tircha. Yachol lidvar sheker lomar, shemashu nimna ein mishum chashash Isur, ela mishum siba acheres. I'm not feeling well. I'm a vegetarian. My stomach is in very bad shape. And you can make up anything. Vehu bichlal haheter shel mutar l'shanos mifnei kavod habrios. This is the famous principle that we derive from Ache, the Shvatim of Yosef, when they told the whole story and they fabricated that Yaakov Avinu said this, and the whole thing was a fabrication. And that's called Darkei Shalom. And you all know the famous story of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who refused back in Slobodka when they had the minhag that the families would invite, the yeshiva bachrim for Pesach, for the Seder, whatever it might be. And Rav Yaakov, in one particular case, had doubts about the Kashrus and the reliability of that host. So he said something which in Lita was almost a non-entity. He said, I don't eat gebrachts. Oh, you don't eat gebrachts. Okay. Find yourself a different place. And Rav Yaakov from that day on never ate gebrachts in his life. Yep. Because the split fraction of a second before he made that comment and it came out of his mouth, he accepted upon himself never to eat gebrachts, which is antithetical to everything in the Lithuanian world. Anyway, but that's the Isha Emes. But for most of us, we're not on that level of Emes. So if we can fabricate a story as to why we don't want to take them up on their offer without them getting insulted, we're allowed to lie. Okay. Next. What hechsherim do we rely on? So you and I can imagine that this book, which has been circulating by the billions, it's like the hottest thing on the market, called MiRabanan, is not going to give you a list of which hechsherim are reliable and which are not. So one of the first things I learned when I touched ground in Canada was that the COR is very, very reliable. And that gave me a certain sigh of relief, if you know what I mean. But I have to tell you, in my family, and we're not such super duper, but there are certain kashriyos that we don't rely on, except for a glass of water. He's not going to take his stand on that. But he does give us certain fundamental principles. Number one, he says, don't trust a hechsher that you never heard of. Number two, make sure that the hechsher comes from a rabbanut musmechet. Let's say, you rely on the local rabbanut. Here in Israel, again, I don't want to say this publicly, but, there's certain places where the rabbanut is known to be very reliable. I know, for example, Yerushalayim and in Netanya, and so there are places. There are other places where, it's out in who knows where, and it's not 100%. He says that today, unfortunately, there are Kashrus organizations that have shemos. They have very flashy names. But the word shemos, if you change the vocalization, al tikri shemos, el shamos. Shamos means destruction. And here on page 21, he says that you could check with the Rabbanut Harashit, the chief rabbinate, to get a list from them of which official kashriyot boards and institutions are reliable. Other than that list, for sure, it's not reliable. I don't know if you should rely on that list. That's a different question. But if it's not on that list, it's just some sort of fly-by-night, My father, Shalom, told me that I command you, if you become a Rav, in your Rabbanis, don't get involved in Kashrus. I think I told you about the Shoftim in Bangor, Maine. I told you that story.
What?
It's terrible. Rav Soloveitchik himself got involved in Kashrus, and recently they dug up the legal, the court cases of those who sued Rabbi Soloveitchik and wanted to accuse him of criminal violation. He goes on to tell you that if you go to a restaurant or if you're invited to any sort of a celebration, an iruah like a chasana or a bris or whatever, if you're staying in a hotel, any place where they're going to feed you, first check out one of two things. Either there's a mashgiach tmidi, you walk in and you say, "Where's the mashgiach?" You know that he's a trustworthy person. Or alternatively, there is a tudat kashrut, which testifies to the fact that this geschäft, this restaurant, this hotel, the kitchen is under supervision, and we check it out, and that's a reliable body of kashrus. My father used to tell a joke. He said somebody came into a restaurant, and the proprietor, I don't remember if it was a pizza, I don't remember what it was. Anyway, he didn't look very reliable, if you know what I mean. So the man comes in and he says, it may have been my father, but I don't remember if it was my father, but he comes in and he says, who gives the supervision, the kashrus here? So the man points to a picture on the wall, a very large photograph of a man with a long beard. He says, "That's my grandfather up on the wall." So he says to him, "You know what? If you were up on the wall and your grandfather was here, I would eat in your restaurant." Anyway, we want to finish today with Trumas and Maisrus. So we have 2 or 3 more minutes. Let's just see the Rambam in Perek Daled Milchas Trumas. And the Rambam says, and this section, I vacillate back and forth whether I should spend too much time on it, because you won't have these issues in Toronto, Canada. But then again, very often you come to Israel, or now there are Israeli products that are coming to Canada and so forth and so on. So maybe we should spend time on this. I don't know. Well, I'll let you decide. And there's something called Hamafresh Shelo B'Reshus Bailam. Now, what this means is the following. If I'm invited as a guest and I have doubts as to whether Trumas of Maisrus were taken off, then l'chora, at the face of it, we can solve that problem very easily. I'll just be mafresh it myself. Problem is that's not acceptable. I can't be mafresh from your payros without your reshus. Okay, fine. So now I could say to you, Reb Yid, I want to be mafresh Trumas and Maisrus. Well, that might not go over too well for a variety of reasons. One of which would be Ava. But another reason would be, what do you mean? Trumas and Maisrus? What are you talking about? I bought this in my local supermarket. It's closed on Shabbos, right? So if you'll take a look on page 22, he gives you what's called a nusach hafrasha b'tnai. Now, it would probably take us a good couple of weeks or maybe months to go through this nusach and really understand the nuances of how you could be mafresh b'tnai and do this hafrasha in such a way that, let's say you're invited on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you're not allowed to be mafresh, but you set up a t'nai which would circumvent the Iser Mukta, for example, or the Iser Hafrasha on Shabbos, and Hayoser Meha V'Echad Shari Yosid LaHafresh. In other words, I'm not going to be mafresh today. I'll do the actual hafrasha after Shabbos. Yesh Truma Gedola B'Tzad Tzfoni, and the rest of it is Tisha Chalokim Kimoso B'Tzad Tzfoni Shal HaPeiros Yemaiser Rishon Echad Mimea Shisnesi Yemaisa Sheni, Yemaisa Truma, Trumas Maisa, Maisa Ani, Vidroma Shal Peros, Yemachulo Al Cham Shal Tel Matbea, Sheikh Du Lechil Meiser, and if he's a member of the Karen L'Trumas of Meisers, Yemachul Al Prutos Shevimatbea, Miuchedes Lechil Zeh, the Karen Trumas of Meisers, Lefi Troya Karen. Again, very, very complicated. So let's just end with the following issue. And this is relevant all over the world. You get invited to someone's house, and the kelim are kosher, but they weren't tovel. You have every reason to believe, and you might even get a hodas bal din for the Baal Bais. We never took these kelim to the mikveh. And these are kelim that are obligated in tevilah. They were bought by goyim, manufactured by goyim. And we're talking about metals or glass. I'm not talking about Corningware and stuff like that, which is probably not even chayiv in tevilah. And you know that you're eating at a kelim that may be kosher, fine, but they need tevilah. And on this issue, we have a gigantic controversy, which I'd like to talk to you about if you have time next week. Is that a good? Again, if you're not interested, I don't want to push it. But to me, these issues about kelim, especially with regard to tefillah, are very, very relevant. So we almost finished the entire chapter. I want to thank David again for sending it out. There's an overview of the chapter on page 25. We're up to page 22. And I would ask you, David, to do me a favor. Just remind me, because this is not my copy, I can't make notes in it, that we got up to page 22, the issue of tefillah's kelim. Okay. Now, the next section here is about dam. I don't think that we should spend too much time on dam. There is dam beitzim. We'll spend 5 minutes on dam beitzim. And then I was wondering if you'd be interested in talking about bugs. I mean, it's not my favorite topic. It's not so aesthetically, but it is a very, very relevant topic. And then he has a discussion here about wines, which I thought was interesting. And finally, a discussion about children.
Eating children?
Children.
I said eating children. I said eating children. You see?
Oh, eating children. Yeah.
Whatever the Rav wants to.
Okay, I'm just trying to find topics that are relevant. Because your Dechel Aleph is gigantic.
Whatever the Rav wants to teach us, we're here.
You're here. All right. That's good to know.
I'm actually going to be in Eretz Yisrael next week.
So you're not going to be able to tune in on Zoom. By the way, you should know we have Zoom in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, I know. I may be able to. I hope so. But number one, in terms of Trumas and Meisters, that would be relevant. But also just to let you know that I'm going to be there. I'm pretty jam-packed. There for 2 weeks only. We're taking my father-in-law along. So the whole. Anyway, so I'll try to be in touch when I'm there.
Yeah, you have my number. Maybe we could get together. You could have a meal in Efrat. I don't know if you trust my Kashrus, especially after today.
I don't know. Once I hear this year,
Have you started driving to the coast, Bobby? Is that why you're not in the house?
That's it. I'm getting a boat to Israel. I'm driving. Yeah.